They came with smiles carved from strategy, with hands that shook yours while searching for the perfect place to plant the knife. They didn't want to kill you outright. That would have made you a martyr. They wanted erosion, gradual disassembly, little collapses masked as misunderstandings. They wanted to make you believe it was all your fault, that every fragment of yourself that began to crack was just a product of your own fragility. And you believed it, for a time. You looked in the mirror and mistook their venom for your own weakness, because that's what they counted on. Not your failure, your doubt. They needed you to internalize their chaos so they could keep their hands clean. And yet, you didn't shatter. You molted. You broke the illusion, not yourself. And now they stretch their hands toward the storm they summoned and find themselves scorched by the very power they once sought to dismantle. They didn't know what they were dealing with. They thought the silence in you meant softness, that your kindness was a symptom of confusion, that your patience was born from insecurity. They mistook your stillness for submission, your composure for compliance. They poked and prodded, expecting screams, but you gave them eyes instead, still, observing, surgical. You studied them like a surgeon studies a tumor. Every insult, every manipulation, every passive-aggressive jab cataloged in the quiet chamber of your awakening. And while they performed, you prepared. While they danced around their drama, you wrote your own exit. They tried to break you because they saw something in you they could never become. They wanted to reduce it, distort it, own it. But you turned every crack into a sharp edge, and now their hands bleed when they try to touch what they once controlled. They operated like parasites, not feeding off your success, but off your confusion. The more uncertain you were, the easier you were to shape. That's how they invaded, not with demands, but with doubts. Are you sure that's the right choice? You've always been a little too much. I'm just saying this because I care. The words that sound like care but taste like poison. You don't notice it at first, because they deliver it softly, like a lullaby made of razor blades. But over time, your inner world becomes a battlefield. You stop trusting your instincts. You apologize before speaking. You second-guess your own joy. That's how breaking begins, not with impact, but with infection, until you forget where they end and you begin. But one day, you stop asking them to validate your strength. And that's when the healing starts. Not pretty, not poetic, just raw reclamation. You rip their voice out of your inner monologue and replace it with your own. There's no manual for surviving slow destruction. There's no applause for the quiet war waged inside your chest every day you chose not to become what they projected onto you. But you fought anyway, in silence, in solitude, in spaces they couldn't reach. You rebuilt your nervous system, taught your body how to trust again, how to walk into rooms without flinching, how to speak without rehearsing 1,000 defensive exits. That's what they'll never understand. The strength it took to choose peace instead of retaliation, to stay calm while they screamed, to walk away while they begged for one more round. They thought you'd always need them, that they had buried their hooks too deep. But what they didn't realize is that some people bleed their way into rebirth, that some roots don't rot, they rewire. And you came back with armor stitched from the very trauma they tried to bury you with. They threw storms at you, hoping you'd drown in your own doubt. But you learned how to breathe underwater. You didn't wait for the sun to rise. You became the fire. That's what makes you terrifying now. Not because you're cruel, but because you're immune. Their absence no longer echoes. Their presence no longer penetrates. You sit in your own gravity, a sovereign force, and that terrifies them more than any scream ever could. They don't reach out because they miss you. They reach out because they're testing the walls, seeing if the old door still opens. But you changed the locks. You rewired the walls. You burned the map and built a kingdom where their name doesn't echo anymore. They tried to break you because that was the only way they knew how to relate. But you turned the rubble into a foundation. And now they wander ruins they can't rebuild. They will say you've become cold, that you're not who you used to be, that your walls are too high, your silence too sharp. Let them, because they never met the real you. They met the version that hadn't yet woken up. They met the caretaker, the peacekeeper, the empath addicted to being needed. But that version died the day you realized love that has to be earned through suffering is not love. It's enslavement. The real you does not bend to be palatable. The real you does not apologize for boundaries. The real you is not interested in being understood by people who only ever showed up to dissect, diminish, or devour. You don't need them to recognize your growth. You don't even need them to witness it, because evolution doesn't need validation. It needs space. And now that you have it, you've become untouchable. They used to pull strings, subtle ones, invisible ones, guilt, nostalgia, shared history, a tear here, a memory there, hoping you'd respond like you used to, hoping you'd mistake the tug for love. But now their strings lie slack, powerless. You don't dance when they gesture anymore. You don't flinch at their silence. That's what victory really looks like. Emotional immunity. Not apathy, but clarity. The kind of clarity that makes manipulation obsolete. They used to press buttons that don't exist anymore. They try to get a reaction and are met with indifference. Not because you don't feel, but because you no longer perform. You've dismantled the machine they once controlled. And without control, they don't know how to exist near you. You are no longer reactive. You're refined, sharpened, unapologetic. Your strength is no longer defensive. It's declarative. You don't exist to prove them wrong. You exist to prove yourself right. That's the difference between healing and hiding. Hiding wears a mask to avoid pain. Healing rips it off to let truth breathe. You chose the brutal path, the one that left you raw, but also the one that left you real. And now, they can't even touch you. Not because you built a fortress, but because you became one. Every brick of your presence is laced with lessons they can't comprehend. Every step you take is a rejection of their blueprint. You didn't just survive, you outgrew their reach. They'll watch from afar now, eyes scanning for weakness, waiting for you to stumble back into the version of yourself they once controlled. But you don't go backwards, because there's nothing left there for you. You learned that anyone who tries to break your spirit is already broken, that cruelty is projection, that control is cowardice in costume. You hold no hate, just distance, no revenge, just growth. And that, more than anything, is what they'll never forgive, that you healed without their permission, that you became whole without their apology, that you found joy in a life where their name carries no weight. They tried to break you, but you learned to bend like fire. And now you burn too brightly to touch. So when they return with softer words and curated regret, let the silence answer for you. Let your peace speak louder than any monologue. You've said enough. You've survived enough. You've risen enough. And now it's time to walk in it, not with spite, with sovereignty. You are not who they left behind. You are not the open wound they once fed from. You are a closed chapter with a sharpened pen. Emotional control isn't built in peace. It's built by choosing stillness when chaos begs for reaction. They wanted you loud, unhinged, reactive. They needed you emotional because emotion gives them access. It opens doors they couldn't unlock with logic, couldn't pick with truth. They don't fight fair, they fight loud. The louder you get, the more they smile. Because while you scream your truth, they rewrite the story. While you bleed honesty, they dress it up as hysteria. You've seen it. The bait. The jabs cloaked as jokes. The provocations wrapped in concern. They push and prod, not because they seek resolution, but because your reaction feeds their illusion of control. And yet you, dangerous you stopped reacting. You went still. And that stillness, that was the death of their game. That was when they realized you'd evolved beyond their reach. Emotional control is not the absence of feeling. It's the choice to withhold your power from people who only want to drain it. Stillness is violence to the manipulative. When you no longer provide the outburst they're used to managing, they panic. Because they don't know how to respond to calm. They can navigate rage. It gives them something to grab onto. But when you go silent, detached, sovereign, they flail. That's the real weapon. Not screaming louder, but removing the stage. You deny them the performance. You take away the audience. And in doing so, you starve them. Emotional control isn't passive. It's surgical. It's knowing when to step back instead of step forward. When to watch instead of warn. When to disappear instead of defend. They think you've lost interest, but you've simply ascended to a level where their chaos no longer has gravity. That's what control looks like. Not suppression, but supremacy over your own impulses. They used to own your nervous system, the rise in your voice, the shake in your hands, the pounding in your chest. They knew exactly which string to pluck to watch you unravel. But you burned the strings. You unlearned the pattern. And now, your calm infuriates them more than your rage ever could. Because your calm says, I don't need to convince you. Your calm says, I don't need to be understood. Your calm says, I don't exist to make you comfortable. Emotional control is choosing silence not out of fear, but out of confidence that you no longer play on their board. You outgrew the game, and they haven't even realized the pieces are gone. There's a particular kind of power that comes from holding your fire when they beg for flame, not because you're weak, but because you know where that road ends. You've walked it, screamed until your throat tore, apologized when you were the one bleeding, explained your soul to people who only wanted ammunition. And now you just stop, not to punish, to preserve. Stillness becomes your sword, because it cuts cleaner. There's no mess, no apology, no aftermath, just absence. That is how emotional control becomes holy. When you recognize that not every insult deserves acknowledgement, that not every battle deserves your presence. Some deserve nothing but your unbothered exit. Control isn't something you were born with. It was earned in fire, in humiliation, in betrayal. It was sculpted in the aftermath of emotional whiplash. You had to learn it, rewire your instincts, teach your body that not every feeling deserves expression, that some emotions must be observed, not obeyed. And that's not repression, that's rebellion. Because in a world addicted to reaction, stillness is subversive. It terrifies them because it makes them irrelevant. They'll call you cold, distant, robotic. Let them drown in their own projections while you master the storm within. You don't owe anyone your emotional availability, especially those who weaponized it. They will try again. Don't doubt that. They'll return with new tricks, softer tones, louder sob stories. They'll find new ways to bait your compassion, hoping the old version of you is still hiding somewhere inside. But emotional control is not a phase. It's a rebirth. You've built a new infrastructure, one they can't navigate. Their map no longer applies. You are uncharted now, and that scares them. Because to control someone emotionally, you must first understand their pain. But your pain has become private, sealed. You've turned your scars into secrets, and your silence into steel. So when they try to reach you, all they find is stillness. And stillness, real stillness, is terrifying when you're used to chaos being the only language you speak. The chaos will always try to knock, through people, through memories, through whispers from the past. It will try to sneak in during moments of weakness. But that's when you remember. Emotional control is built precisely in those moments. Not when everything is calm, but when everything begs for your collapse. You don't need to prove you're okay. You just need to remain. That's the hardest part. Holding your center when the floor shakes. Breathing through the provocation. Smiling when your bones remember the war. That's when you become something they cannot touch. Something beyond insult, beyond bait, beyond chaos. Emotional control makes you mythic. You're no longer someone they can figure out. They speak, hoping to provoke. You blink, that's all. And in that blink is a boundary louder than any shout, because it says, I've heard this before. I've survived this before. And I no longer require it to prove who I am. They don't just lose the ability to manipulate you. They lose the ability to matter. You stopped giving them the keys to your peace. You reclaimed your reactions. And now, even when they try to hurt you, it's like throwing knives at air. You're no longer standing where they expect you to be. You've moved inward. And inward is a place they can't follow. The mind stops spinning when you stop feeding it stories that keep you weak. The mind doesn't just think, it feasts. And it's starving or satisfied depending on the stories you spoon-feed it. Most people, they feed it poison laced with nostalgia. They repeat lines handed to them in childhood, by cowards disguised as parents, by lovers who only knew how to love themselves, by friends who hated your reflection because it reminded them of their own failure. You carry these stories like relics. I'm too much. I'm not enough. They'll leave if I speak. They'll hurt me if I stay. These aren't truths. They're tapes, looped and looped until you call them identity. And while your spirit rots, your mind spins. It spins because it cannot find traction in lies. It spins because clarity terrifies the false self. And they want you spinning. A weak mind is predictable. A distracted mind is compliant. But the moment you stop feeding it the script written by others, it starves the parasite. It collapses the illusion. And silence, real silence, floods in. They never taught you how to sit still without shivering, because stillness exposes what distraction masks. And you were always distracted by validation, by old pain, by the hope that maybe this time they'll treat you better. But hope built on fiction is just a leash. They needed you to need that leash, because it kept you from seeing the cage. But then you paused, you exhaled, and you stopped telling the same story. You stopped saying, I'm broken because they left. You started saying, I was breaking long before they walked out, and maybe that's why they were allowed to stay so long. That's when the spinning slowed, because the story changed. And when the story changes, the entire machinery of your suffering starts to grind to a halt. You are not your thoughts. You are the hand that feeds them, the architect that programs them, and the enemy that often keeps them on life support, long after their usefulness has decayed. The mind obeys pattern. If you keep feeding it betrayal, it will expect betrayal. If you keep feeding it guilt, it will crave punishment. And if you dare, just once, to feed it a thought not rooted in self-hate, it will revolt. It will spin harder. Because healing is not the mind's habit. Suffering is. You're addicted to the pain because you've confused it with proof that you're alive. But survival is not a badge, and pain isn't depth. At some point, you must starve the self-pity. Let the old narrative choke on your refusal. They don't get to live in your head rent-free. Not anymore. Not while you're still paying the price in peace. They wanted you to keep telling the story of the wound. Keep reliving the moment it all fell apart. Because a mind stuck in the past can't act in the present. And if you can't act, you can't change. So they left you frozen, repeating, spinning, internalizing. But change, real change, begins the moment you decide the story no longer serves the character. That you're not obligated to play the victim just because the opening scene was ugly. You rewrite it. You say, that wasn't pain, that was pruning. That wasn't abandonment, that was release. That wasn't love, that was ownership wearing perfume. Every time you change the meaning, you shatter their grip. They don't get to narrate your downfall anymore. You've taken the pen back, and your mind, it stops spinning when it realizes it no longer needs to prove pain for its voice to matter. You learned early that pain made you interesting, that being broken earned applause, that tragedy was attention, so you spun your mind like a carousel of collapse, hoping someone would see the storm and call it art. But storms don't save, they destroy. And while you performed the pain for others, you forgot how to feel anything that didn't demand an audience. The mind kept spinning because it didn't know what else to do. Calm was foreign, joy was suspicious, peace felt like boredom, so you fed it more chaos, more fear, more drama disguised as connection. But that's not living. That's circling the drain with pretty words. You were never meant to be someone's favorite tragedy. You were built to evolve past even your own applause. And when you realized that, you stopped spinning and started moving. They hate when you stop telling the story that made them the center. When you stop crying in rooms they used to haunt. When you no longer use their betrayal as your identity. Because if you're not broken by them anymore, what does that make them? If your story moves on, their part dies. That's what they fear. Not your success, your healing, your detachment, your refusal to keep bleeding just so they remain relevant in your mythology. And you, once an open wound they could prod for attention, became closed. Not cold, just inaccessible. Your mind no longer obsessed over who left. It started wondering who you'd become if you stopped needing them to come back. That's the pivot. That's when the loop breaks. Your mind is a beast, but it learns quickly. The moment you shift the diet, it shifts the output. Stop feeding it questions with no answers. Stop asking why they did it. Start asking why you let it define you. Stop analyzing their absence. Start building your presence. The thoughts don't stop overnight, but the obsession fades when the attention moves. When the new story gets louder than the old one. When you say, I'm tired of being tired, and your mind finally believes you. The loop ends, not because the pain vanishes, but because you finally stopped rewarding it with your time. You gave your silence to peace, not nostalgia. And in doing so, you became untouchable to the very voices that used to live in your head, like kings. They'll come back, not physically, but in echoes, through songs, through dreams, through strangers who use the same words. They'll knock on your mental doors, hoping for the old script to play, but you won't answer, not with rage, with stillness. That's how they know they've lost access. The power, finally, returned.